Stalin is dead, as the title of the film so cleverly points out. The cult of personality has crumbled before their eyes, and the people running the show have absolutely no idea what to do. Why? Because dictatorships are built and run on absurdism. The Death of Stalin is a tragic comedy film from 2017 of power eating itself. The Rebel shows us why. When rebellion loses its soul, when it becomes a tool for new tyrant, it no longer liberates. It oppresses and it kills. To understand the absurd world Stalin's death leaves behind, we need to rewind back to 1917. After centuries of serfdom and exploitation under Tsarist rule, the Russian people had enough. Under the banner of Marxist socialism, they launched a revolution to build a working class utopia. No kings, no class oppression, just equality in rights, labor, and pay. But where did that all go wrong? Well, a central figure in the revolution was Vladimir Lenin. He promised to end Russia's involvement in the First World War and to deliver quote-unquote peace, bread, and land. But once in power, things changed quickly. The socialist movement split between the socialist revolutionaries, who wanted a more gradual reform of the system, and Lenin's Bolsheviks, who were more akin to armed and violent revolution. When the opposition won more seats in the newly formed assembly, Lenin dissolved it by force. He set up Bolshevik councils, created a secret police called the Cheka, and banned factions within the party, instating a dictatorship with himself at the center. With his death, Lenin left behind not just a centralized regime, but a model of how power could be maintained. His successor, Joseph Stalin, took that model and amplified it into an absolute form of totalitarianism. The film opens with Stalin's sudden collapse and a room full of terrified officials who aren't even sure if they're allowed to call a doctor. What follows is not just a power vacuum, it's a full-blown, chaotic tug of war, riddled with fear, betrayal, and opportunism. The Vrenti Beria is the head of the NKVD, acts fast, releasing prisoners, digging up dirt, and blackmailing others into submission. Nikita Khrushchev, seemingly the joker of the group, who went from Stalin's personal joker, gradually positions himself as Beria's counterweight, making backroom alliances and seizing military support. Georgy Malenkov is technically Stalin's successor, but is ultimately just a weak puppet caught in the crossfire, and a couple other characters that hover in the middle, indecisive, fearful, or just playing whichever side seems safer. No one is sure what's legal. No one knows who's watching. Even Stalin's daughter isn't being safe from being manipulated as a symbol of legitimacy. The entire movie plays out like a farce, but the stakes are deadly, because the absurdity is not just stylistic, it's the operating logic of the system of authoritarianism. The film opens in 1953 with a radio orchestra performance. Stalin, listening at home, demands a recording of the concert, even though it wasn't recorded. In total panic, the studio reassembles the entire orchestra and audience to replay the performance just to satisfy Stalin's whim. A conductor faints, the audience is bribed to return, and everyone pretends that everything is normal, even though they all know that failure to comply could mean execution or exile. This moment is an analogy for the entire movie and the system they find themselves in, and it ultimately sets up the tone for the rest of the film. An absurd system where everyone lies, everyone performs, and everyone is terrified. Shortly after receiving the re-recorded performance, Stalin reads a list of people to be arrested, then laughs so hard he collapses from a cerebral hemorrhage. Stalin is found the next morning by guards, but even they are afraid to enter his room because no one gave them orders to do so. They call the senior members of the Presidium, or the Soviet cabinet. When Khrushchev, Beria, Malenkov, and Molotov arrive, the scene is almost slapstick. They're unsure whether Stalin is alive or dead. They don't know if they should get doctors because Stalin had purged most of them, and the few remaining doctors are terrified of being asked to diagnose him incorrectly. Camus' absurdism lives here. Truth, reason, and action are all paralyzed by fear. Beria, the head of the NKVD, acts quickly, sealing Stalin's office, gathering blackmail on others. He and Khrushchev begin pulling everyone into a silent civil war of influence and sabotage. Beria pushes reforms to look progressive, while quietly consolidating power for blackmail. Khrushchev gathers allies and positions himself as the alternative. This is where Albert Camus comes in. The French philosopher you may have seen floating around on TikTok. Camus is the face of absurdism, a branch of existential philosophy that explores the tension between our human need for meaning and the meaninglessness of the universe. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, the guy who's kind of like the face of existentialism, argued that humans should create their own meaning. Much like many inanimate objects have a defined purpose, so should we define ours. But this is where Camus pushes back. Even if we create meaning, it doesn't change the absurdity of existence. We are Sisyphus, endlessly pushing the boulder up the hill, only to watch it roll back down. But many people don't take into account that Camus' philosophy actually was split into phases: absurdism, rebellion, and love, which was never really finished. The myth of Sisyphus, Camus says the absurd is not a puzzle to be solved. It's a condition to be recognized and rebelled against. In totalitarian systems like Stalin's USSR, the absurd is weaponized. In The Death of Stalin, absurdity becomes a tool of fear and control. The rules change daily. One day you're promoted, the next you're executed. Blackmail, manipulation, random loyalty tests become routine. Obedience doesn't guarantee safety, and nothing does. This creates a terrifying reality where logic is useless and trust can be deadly. Camus upholds the idea that rebellion starts as a human response to injustice. A person says no to oppression. It's a moral act grounded in solidarity. But once rebellion becomes ideological, it risks becoming tyrannical itself. This is where Camus places Lenin and Stalin. Camus actually used to be an adept of socialism himself, but later on gave up on this ideology. Lenin, according to Camus, marks the turning point where rebellion becomes revolutionary dogma. Lenin takes Marx's historical materialism and turns it into a rigid system. Something that can justify anything, even mass killing in the name of the future. Camus criticizes Lenin for introducing the idea of necessary violence, the belief that terror is acceptable if it leads to a better world. Then comes Stalin, who Camus sees as the logical consequence of Lenin's ideology. If Lenin justified terror as a temporary means to a just end, Stalin made terror the system itself. Under Stalin, revolution was no longer a means to liberation. It became a permanent state of war, even in peacetime. Camus argues that Stalinist communism is not a rebellion against oppression, but a new form of absolutism. It betrays the original spirit of rebellion by turning it into nihilism, the belief that everything can be sacrificed and that nothing else matters. Truth, morality, human lives. If it serves the revolution, man becomes the servant of history, no longer responsible for his actions. The revolutionary says, history will judge me. That's how gulags, purges, and show trials become justified. In short, Camus sees Lenin as the philosopher tyrant, the man who tries to make history follow his logic, and Stalin as the bureaucratic executioner of that logic, both betraying the initial dignity and solidarity at the true heart of rebellion. Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus is incumbent of how a dictatorship operates, especially in the context of this film. Sisyphus was a man punished by the gods to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, just to watch the boulder roll back down again as he gets to the top, repeating this cycle for all of eternity. In this sense, dictatorship becomes a governing system of the absurd. The perpetrators, the people who run the Communist Party, or nomenclature as it is called, pick the meddle with the divine, or what people put as the divine in the cult of personality, and they get punished divinely for it, as they cannot just quit or try to change the system that forces them to push the boulder up the hill. They may have more wealth or power than all of the other citizens of the system. They live in constant gripping fear and stress of the absurd of the system that they have built, knowing that even if you're the head of state, secret police, or army, that the next time they wake up, it might come crumbling down right on their heads. In this sense, the cult of personality and the people who run it represent Sisyphus at an absolutist level, as Camus puts it. Eventually, Khrushchev orchestrates a military-backed coup. During a committee meeting, Beria is suddenly arrested by Zhukov's troops. Khrushchev, who uses a pre-written list, sentences him immediately, and Beria is executed and burned. The same group that once praised him now spits on his corpse. Khrushchev emerges as the new leader, going from Stalin's personal joker to the head of state. In the final shot, the film ends almost cyclically. He's watching a concert and another politician behind him stares with the same silent calculation that Khrushchev once had towards Stalin. The wheel turns again. Power has changed hands, but the system hasn't. It's still driven by fear, it's still driven by paranoia, and it's still driven by an iron fist. The musicians in the concerts, the politicians, the heads of state and military are forced to play the same game of musical chairs once again, being forced to perform much akin to Sisyphus. Also, if you could subscribe, it would help me very much. Thanks.